Perfect. So hi, Wanda.
Hi, Cam.
How
How
are
are you
you?
today?
I'm good, thanks. How about you?
Just
And
trying to stay warm.
yes, exactly. Cold day today. Welcome, everybody, and Happy New Year to you. If we haven't said that to you before, Cam Forbes here, General Manager, Remax Realtron, and Wanda Ellens, our Manager of Operations and also our FINTRAC Compliance Officer. So welcome. Good afternoon, Wanda.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Alrighty. Today we've got a presentation that's going to last probably about 20 minutes, not too long. What we wanted to do is to go through a few things that are just a refresher in terms of FINTRAC, a few things that are common questions that you have for us every year, a little more complicated situations that you may not come across all the time. So often we'll forget. So we'll do a little bit of a refresher on that. And then, of course, FINTRAC does new things every once in a while, and they did a few new things the middle of 2021. So we're going to go through those as well. And please ask us any questions as we go if you have any questions, but welcome. And again, Happy New Year to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to advance the slides. Today is January 11th, of course. And as I said, we're just going to begin with a bit of a refresher by going through the individual ID form, just how to use the document, go through common omissions, the feedback that we've received in multiple FINTRAC audits over the years, and also the receipt of funds, which of course is completed if you're a co-op agent, you're receiving deposit funds principally from your client. Next, as I mentioned, we'll go through some of the more complicated situations, things you may not come across every day. They're actually not that complicated, but if you don't deal with it every day, you may not remember what to do. So really, there's two things that we wanted to go through. One is dealing with an entity. So an entity, most common entity is a corporation. So when you have a corporation as a client, how do you identify them? And we'll go through that. And then secondly, power of attorney. So every once in a while, you'll be dealing with a power of attorney who is your client. And so the question is often asked, who's my client? Who do I identify? Who's the third party in that transaction? So we'll deal with that again as well. And then finally, as we mentioned, some new requirements that came into place June of last year, June of 2021. Some neat acronyms for them, PEP and I don't know, HEO maybe, is that what we say the other one, HEO? Yeah. There we go. But three different things. So first off, beneficial ownership of corporations. So really that means anyone who's got a control or ownership interest of 25% or greater, they're deemed to be a beneficial ownership of the corporation. Secondly, we've got this concept of a PEP, which is a politically exposed person. There's a new form for that. And also the same form is the heads of international organizations, HEO, or if you'd like to pronounce it that way, same form, just another piece of identification when you're identifying an individual. So we'll go through those. There's nothing too complicated about them, but just a new piece of paper that we have to do. And we'd be remiss if we didn't give the bit of an overview about FINTRAC. So FINTRAC requirements are required. They're required by the law. This presentation is going to go through them as specifically as they apply to you and your real estate practices and us as a brokerage, Remax Realtron. Wanda Ellens is our compliance officer, as I mentioned. And so if you're ever in doubt, Wanda's the person to go to about anything FINTRAC related, whether you're not sure how to fill out a form or you have a particular situation you're unsure of, you can go to Wanda. You can always go to your managers, obviously. They're pretty good with FINTRAC as well, of course. But if you have any special needs, anything special, Wanda's your go-to for that. I'm technically what's called the internal auditor for FINTRAC, which means that I've got to do a little bit of an audit of our process periodically once a year. And so I do that. And as part of that audit, they look for us to have regular training and updating of our agents, and that's part of what we're doing today. And again, as mentioned, FINTRAC is the law, so that's why it's important. It's a bit of paperwork. It's not the most fun thing to do in the world, but it's required of us. So we got to do it. So we might as well do it properly. And finally, before I go on to anything else, I think you guys all know that we as a brokerage don't accept cash transactions, which makes the whole risk profile for FINTRAC less with our organization. There are brokerages that do accept cash, not many, but there are some. And of course, cash is much more suspect in terms of financing of terrorist organizations or money laundering, which of course is what FINTRAC is all about. So that's that. No cash deposits. So we don't have to deal with things like large cash transactions, that sort of thing. Okay, so refresher. I went a little too far there. Refresher. So individual identification record. So form 630. This is the most common form you're going to use in real estate practice. And most of you will have used this already unless you're new to the business. This is when we're identifying the individual who's our client who we're going to be working with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up that form. So I've got a number of different forms here. Let me just go and grab this and I'm going to bring it across just so we can take a look at it in itself. And so again, this is form 630. This is the individual identification information record. This is a standard form, so listed alphabetically on the Toronto MLS under the forms. And of course, you're really going to be doing the identification of an individual. So you're going to, and sorry, I'm not at the top of the form here, I'm down on the form. So we're going to start off with the property address. You're going to fill in full address with postal code. Amazingly enough, FINTRAC doesn't like it when we don't have the postal code on there. So please put the postal code on the address, your name, sales representative, broker name, and the date that you verified their identification. So that's the date you actually looked at their source document, which is most likely going to be their driver's license or passport. Those are the most common things you'd use to identify an individual. And so when you're identifying an individual, you don't have to, and it's actually best not to take a copy of the driver's license. And so what you would do is you would copy the information while looking at the driver's license, looking at the picture, make sure it's the person obviously you're dealing with, and then you're going to write down the full legal name of the individual, their address with postal code, their date of birth, and you're going to ask them what their principal occupation is. FINTRAC wants us to be really specific on that occupation. So if they are a teacher, they want to know that it's a high school science teacher. So the more specific in terms of the occupation, the better off. So just try to be really specific here. Not sales representative, real estate sales representative, not teacher, high school science teacher, to be as specific as possible. Then, of course, you're going to put in the information from the driver's license or the passport. So the type of document, and this is where you're going to write it's going to be a driver's license or passport. You're going to do the identifying number, which is the passport number or driver's license number, the issuing jurisdiction, which is, of course, if it's a driver's license, generally it's going to be Ontario, but not always. And a passport is going to be Canada. And the expiry date of that document. So the expiry date of the driver's license or the passport. Okay. There's other ways to identify people. I'm not going to go into it because the easiest and simplest way is to look at the driver's license or look at the passport. They don't allow you to use the health card, by the way. I think most of you know that, but you can't identify someone using a health card. And when you continue on the form, it's going to deal with folks that are unrepresented. And if they're unrepresented, you're going to make an effort to identify them. You're going to put the information in here. If for some reason you can't identify them, there's the spot here and you'd write it in. And you'd have to understand why, like why would somebody not want to identify themselves? That's a red flag in itself. And again, if you get a red flag like that, talk to Wanda, because maybe we should put in a suspect report or a report to FINTRAC just about a suspicious possible situation. Okay. Third party. So I'll deal with this and I'll come back to it when we talk about power of attorney principally. So there are sometimes other parties that are involved in a transaction. They're called third parties. So they're not your client. They're not the person who's going to be signing off on your working with a realtor, your buyer rep agreement, or your listing agreement and the agreement of purchase sale, etc. But there's somebody who has a relationship with the property, who has an interest in the property. And again, the most common situation here is when you have a power of attorney who's representing another party who's the third party, and we'll come back to that. But this just simply asks, is there a third party involved here? And in most transactions, there wouldn't be a third party involved, but if there is, then you just describe the relationship, who the third party is and their relationship to the client that you're dealing with. And then you'd identify that third party. So if it's a third party, it's out of country someone, there's a power of attorney here, you're dealing with an out of country person, you'd obviously need to identify them, and you'd identify them using the same documents, driver's license, passport being the most common thing. And you're identifying the same things about the third party, their occupation, date of birth, etc. Now, when you get on to the last pages here for the ID form for individuals, it gets into the risk assessment. So we need to assess all of our clients for risk. This started out as a concept of if we had somebody who had a client relationship with us, which they had defined as more than one transaction over a 5-year period of time, and they've kind of gotten away from that. So in essence, when you have a client, you should be doing an assessment of them, whether you've dealt with them only once, this is your first time, or you've dealt with them multiple times. You'll do an assessment and you'll say, are they a low risk? Are they a medium risk? Are they a high risk? And most clients you're going to deal with are low risk. They're going to be Canadian citizens or a resident physically present. They're going to be a foreign citizen or resident that does not operate in a high risk country. Those are going to be most situations. The odd time you're going to be into a medium risk situation, which is probably they are from a high risk country. And you can actually search online on just FINTRAC high risk countries, and they'll give you a list of high risk countries to identify, and medium risk, you can put it there. If you're ever in a situation where you've really got a high risk, consult with your manager and consult with Wanda. It would be very rare to be dealing with a high risk situation, and for you to be aware that it's a high risk situation, obviously. But if it is, definitely tell your brokerage's compliance officer, which is Wanda Ellens, about any high risk situation that you feel you may be in. Okay. Excuse me. And so business relationship, if you do have this relationship that is for, longer period of time, you'll just check the appropriate box. So purpose and intended nature of the business relationship, you acting as an agent for purchase and sale. It's just asking you what type of transaction this is. So you're going to tick off residential property, most likely in most cases. Measures to make sure that the client ID that you have is current. So here you don't have to worry because you're going to identify the client every time. Even if you did a transaction with them last year, you'll ask to see their passport or driver's license again. That's the easiest way of dealing with this. So you can just simply say here, you've reviewed the identification document again to update your records. Okay, that's the easiest way to deal with this. And that's pretty well it. So if in any doubt, talk to your manager. If in any situation where you've got what you think is a high risk situation, report it to Wanda, who is our FINTRAC compliance officer. Okay, and that's the individual ID form, simple as that. And I'll just go back to our presentation here. The second thing I wanted to deal with was just our second form, Form 632, which is identification mandatory agent agreement. So this is when you've got a client who you can't physically ID yourself. So they're not resident or they're not here with you. So you can't look at them. You can't get their driver's license. You can't do the identification. So in this situation, you need to have another party do this for you. And this can be a lawyer. This can be a real estate agent in a different jurisdiction. And what you would do is you're going to then use this agreement, which is an agreement with them that they're going to identify the client for you. And I'm just going to go over to that form now as well. Put it on the screen. So 632. And here's 632 at the stop. So again, identification mandatory agent agreement between this brokerage and between this agent. And the agent can again be another agent in another brokerage in another province or country. It could be a lawyer. The more international, the more it's away from North America, the lawyer's the best way to do this, because at least there's some standards around the professionalism of the lawyer. So that's a good way. Or if there's a professional accountant, that type of thing would be best to do this agreement with. And again, what they're going to do is you have this agreement, and their purpose is they're going to be identifying your client for them. And they're going to go through obviously and check the identification of the person. and they're going to do the client ID form there. They're going to write down all the information. They're going to provide it to you, and they're going to have signed this, authenticizing them as the agent acting for you, and that they are doing what you are supposed to do. They're acting in your place to identify the individual. Okay, pretty well as simple as that. Those are the two most common things you'll be up against. And then finally, the most common thing is the next form I'm just going to go to, which is the receipt of funds form. So receipt of funds form is when you're representing a buyer. This only involves buyer sell transactions. This does not involve leases, rentals. So just buyer sell. You're going to be recording the receipt of funds, how you got the funds, what's the form of the funds, who they came from. So you're going to have the property transaction address, you're going to have your sales representative broker name, your name, and then information about the funds, the amount of the funds, the currency of the funds, the date of receipt of the funds, the type of funds that you've received, which will generally be, certified check, bank draft, wire transfer. Those are probably the three most common ways that you'll receive funds. The method of receipt is they're going to either give it to you in person, or they're going to electronically do it if it's a transfer, obviously. And if there is funds that are non-Canadian, they're asking for the rough exchange rate and do exchange rate conversion for the funds. Okay, and that's pretty well it. When FINTRAC first came out, and I'm losing track of the number of years we've had FINTRAC in place, Wanda, but it's probably 15 years or so, something like that. Long time. Yeah, long time. There was originally a lot of confusion because it asked for agents to get the bank information from the person who'd be holding this. So it contemplated, or there was a mistake or misinformation about an agent having to go to the listing brokerage and say, what's your real estate trust account information. You don't have to do that. Okay. There's no requirement for you to get bank information from the listing brokerage who's going to hold this deposit. It's just your responsibility, since you're receiving the funds, to fill this out for your buyer. Okay. And that's all that is. All right, so those are the basics. I'm going to again go back to our presentation here. So again, just as a summary, driver's license, passport, permanent resident card, if they're not a Canadian citizen, works in terms of ID, not the health card as mentioned. Complete the full address, please, with the postal code. Be as specific with the occupation as possible. Don't need the listing brokerage bank account information, only required for purchase and sales, not for leasing and rentals. And there's a new requirement, which we're going to deal with at the end of this presentation, in regard to politically exposed persons and heads of international organizations, which is an extra step in the identification process of an individual. And there's a form to do it, and it's a real simple form, but it's another form you got to do when you're identifying individuals now. So that's the new thing we'll deal with. Okay, so that's that. Two areas that are most commonly asked, I think, of us, Wanda, about these situations. One is when you're dealing with a company. So it's an entity is what they call it, because an entity could be a company, a nonprofit organization, but generally it's an incorporation that you're dealing with in our context. And so how do you deal with that? And then secondly, as I mentioned earlier, how do you deal in a power of attorney type situation? So dealing with an entity corporation. So Form 631 is the corporate entity identification form. So first thing to know, there's a different form, ID form for corporations that you have to fill out. And so that's the information about the corporation or entity itself. You have to, though, both do the individual ID of the person who's going to be signing, the authorized signing officer for the company, and you have to do the entity ID form. So let me say that again. And this is the most common confusion. So in dealing with a company or an entity, you have to do two identification forms. You have to do the form for the entity itself, for the corporation, and you have to do a form for the individual who's going to be signing everything for you. So agreement of purchase sale, working with a realtor, listing agreement, buyer representation agreement. Okay, so you've got to do both. That's the most common misunderstanding, is people just think they only have to do the entity form, but you got to do both. And what often is asked or not understood is, what source documents do I use to identify a corporation? Okay, and there's two types of documents that they want you to see to identify the corporation. One is something that just shows the company who the authorized signatory is for the company. So who's authorized to sign on behalf of the company, the working with the realtor, all the legal documents. Okay, so what you're going to want to see, and most commonly you're going to see, is the articles of incorporation. And the articles of incorporation will identify the directors of the company. Okay, and the directors of the company have the authority to sign documents on behalf of the corporation. Okay, so articles of incorporation, most common document you'll use to find out who the authorized signature person is, authorized signing officer, and that's the person you'll be working with. Okay, so, and then the second thing they want you to do is to ensure this corporation is still an active corporation that exists. It's not just some sort of fictitious thing or something that was created a long time ago and is no longer a going concern. And so that can be anything from a notice of assessments received. So a company files taxes every year, just like an individual, and they get a notice of assessment back from Revenue Canada, from the CRA. So it can be that. It can be their most recent notice of assessment for filing taxes. It could be an HST assessment because they get an assessment notice back from the government for that as well, which shows that they're active, they're paying HST. And there's a document you can actually purchase too if you had to online. You just do certificate of status for an Ontario or Canadian company, and you can purchase it. And that also will give you that it's an active corporation, that it's current on its filings. Okay, so three most common things to just identify if the company is a going concern, is still operating. And that's the second source document that FINTRAC would like all of us to do when we identify a corporation and entity. So again, I'm going to say that one more time. First off, you got to do two identification forms for a company: the entity identification form and the individual identification form. The individual identification form is going to be based on who's signing the document, which you'll have found out by who you're dealing with, and you'll have checked that they have the authority to sign on behalf of the company in the articles of incorporation, most likely. Okay. So that's dealing with an entity or a corporation. And again, it's probably the most common thing you'll have questions about. So Wanda and I wanted to go through that with you just so you had a bit of an understanding. And we're recording our session today. We're going to send it out as well, everybody. So you've got it to refer to if you're ever in this situation and you forget, because it's not every day we're dealing with companies, right? We're usually dealing with individuals. Number two, power of attorney. So power of attorney. So we don't deal with power of attorneys too often, but they come up now and then. It's more common than some of us may know. Power of attorneys are used for a lot of different reasons, but most commonly they're used in the situation where a client, an owner of a property, is incapacitated. So this is often, parents and the kids. The kids are the power of attorney. The parents may have Alzheimer's or dementia or be physically bedridden and not completely with it. So there may be a power of attorney for those types of situations. That's the most common. The second type of situation, which is less common but still exists, is you've got somebody who's abroad, who's not here, who's not going to be seeing the home, who's not going to be signing documents, but they're the one actually purchasing the property or selling the property. And they may have a power of attorney here, which is often going to be a lawyer who's the power of attorney. But the key thing here is, you need to see that power of attorney document, okay? And it's an official document signed with the lawyer and witnessed by them for the individual who's granting the power of attorney and the person who's receiving the power of attorney. You need to see that. But in terms of FINTRAC, the key thing is that you need to identify the individual who's the power of attorney. That's your client. So you're going to do the individual ID form for them. And then the third party on that form, you're going to fill out the information for the third party. And in situations where you have somebody who has capacity, you're going to identify them. You're going to try to identify everyone who's a third party. So the owner of the home or the person purchasing. If they are completely incapacitated, then you would note that on there, that third party is, incapacitated, unable to verify ID, and that's okay. You'd write that right on the form. Okay. And that's right on the individual identification form, as we've already gone through. those two situations. I don't know if there's any other questions you get, Wanda, on those two things. I think that probably covers the material on those two, but yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
The
good.
biggest thing is, of course, with the corporation, they don't realize that they have to do the individual as well for whoever is actually signing the agreement of purchase and sale.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good, good. And I've got so guys, I see there's some questions in the chat. Thanks very much. We don't have it interactive right now just to manage the sound and everything, but I'm going to go through anything in the chat one, and I will go through and answer any questions. Okay, and then you can raise your hand as well if you want to actually say something. And we'll look at the Q&A here too. So I think we have a couple of question answers, which I'm just going to pop over to, and we have a couple of chat things as well. I'll come back to them is what I'm going to do, guys. Okay. So those are the two most common situations where we're asked for help or people forget what to do. New concepts. So there's a couple of new concepts that came into play June 1st, 2021, just last year. First one is beneficial ownership of corporations. So there's a new form 636, which is exactly that, beneficial ownership record. And this is to identify anybody who is, so this isn't going to be the person signing off on your documents and everything. You're already identified them. This is somebody else who has influence on the transaction because they have a 25% or greater control or ownership of a company. So they want us to fill out this form in those situations for those people who aren't the signing authority that you've identified for the corporation. So these are other people who have control or influence over the transaction. And it's form 636. And I'll pop that up there, pop it up here for you. Form 636. So beneficial ownership interest. It's pretty simple. So only complete the sections that apply. It says add additional pages if necessary. But for corporate entities, you're going to name all the directors of the corporation, which will come from the articles in the corporation. The names and addresses of all persons who own directly or indirectly, that's going to come from the articles in corporation. You may also want to look at what's called a registry. So there's 3 registries that a company keeps in their records, in their minute book. One is a shareholder registry, one is a director registry, and one is an officer registry. So let me explain those a little bit. So a company needs to keep records of who they either appoint or elect to positions. Directors are elected to positions, and so many corporations only have one director if they're small. Okay, obviously there's no election there, but the shareholders would generally elect the directors. Officers or officers of the company are appointed by the directors. So directors, most commonly board of directors. That's where that comes from. It's the directors of the company. They don't operate the company day to day. They look after the overall supervision of the brokerage for the share of the company for the shareholders. Officers are truly that: chief executive officer, president, chief financial officer, treasurer, secretary. Those are officers of the company. They're appointed to their positions. And so what they're looking for again here is just simply anyone who has influence over the transaction, who you've not identified because they're going to be signing the documents. And so you're going to put the names down, you're going to identify them if they have more than 25%. Corporate entities. If you happen to be dealing with a trust, which would be very rare, trust is just a different type of entity, you'd be filling out the information here about trustees and beneficiaries. And a trust is just that. It's a way of holding assets and trust for somebody else, a benefactor. Okay. And I think you guys all know that. There's a section for widely held, publicly held trust entities. So these would be ones that are generally listed on the stock exchanges, right? Public funds. So a trust like a real estate investment trust is an example, a REIT. But that's it. Most of the time, you're going to be dealing with a corporation. You're going to be listing all of the directors of the corporation, anyone who has any influence on it. And then you're going to pop down to the next part of the form, record keeping. And for the identities, provide information explaining entities, ownership, control structure. This doesn't have to be complicated. But again, if you've got a shareholder registry, it's going to say Cam Forbes owns 100 shares, which is 100% of the outstanding shares, Class A shares of this corporation. Okay, that's a very simple one. And in most cases, you're going to have a very simple corporate structure you're dealing with. If you happen to be dealing with a nonprofit, this section here obviously deals with nonprofits specifically, and it's going to ask what you checked to find out who has influence. And you're just going to tick off, as I mentioned, a minute book, which generally has all the corporate records, and including shareholders registry, officer registry, director registry, whether it's annual returns, whether you've seen a shareholder agreement, but most likely you're going to see the articles of incorporation. You're going to see the registries, the minute book with the registries. Those are the most common documents you're going to see for this. Okay. And if for some reason you can't, complete sections 1, 2, and confirm the accuracy under subsection 4, you're going to complete this, and you're just going to, who's the chief executive officer for the company. So who's in control of the mothership. That's that. So not too complicated. Again, this is just for dealing with entities. Generally, there'll be corporations. If you happen to have a corporation that has others who are an influence on it because they have a 25% or more controlling interest or ownership interest, then you would use this form to identify them. Okay, that's one new thing this year. And I'm just going to pop back over to the PowerPoint presentation quickly there. There we go. Okay, so that's how you complete it, what you complete it, and the next page. So the next new concept, which is the final new concept, is politically exposed persons or heads of international organizations. So I'm going to make this real simple. I'm going to go to the form, and then I'm going to explain, what is this all about? What is and it's not a POP, it's a PEP. Sorry, politically exposed person.
Yeah.
I've got the wrong thing there. It's a PEP. And what is a heads of international organizations, and when do you have to complete the form, and how do you complete it? Okay, so it's 634 is the form. And again, I'm just going to pop over here and pop up the forms, go to 634, make it bigger for you. And so both types of people are dealt with in the one form. That's the good news. And so this is an extra form you have to fill out now. Yes, I know we're going to have some fun with this. It's another form, not too much fun, but good news is it's pretty simple. And so there's a definition of what these are, but let's just say, so name of individual under view. So this is the individual you're identifying with your individual ID form. And then you're going to go to this form, and you're just going to say, okay, are they a politically exposed person? Are they a head of an international organization? And 99.9% of the time, you're not dealing with that. So you're going to go none of the above. And there you go. That's pretty well does it for you. And if you do happen to be dealing with one, then you're going to say, what are they? And how did you make that determination? Did you search the internet? Did you ask the individual? Is there some other basis that you learned about this? And then it's going to ask specifically what it is. How are they one of these two categories of people? So name of the organization that the position is held in. And then it's going to just ask a little bit more information. Number 7 here is actually not required. So this is something that really applies to financial institutions, money traders. I think the real estate organizations put this in here to be careful. It actually doesn't apply to us, but this is 100,000 in cash, which we don't take cash, so it never applies, or virtual currency. So Bitcoin, we don't deal with that either. So it doesn't apply. Don't have to worry about that in any situation. And then the definition. So politically exposed person that deals with it, I'm not going to read it there, and a head of an international organization. Again, 99.9% of the time, you're not dealing with these people. It's an extra form. Unfortunately, you got to fill it out. FINTRAC will be very happy that Wanda and I are speaking to you about it right now. So it is important. It is the law. It's really simple, none of the above for generally most people, and it's just an add-on form that you can have. And as you can see here, there's no requirement for your client to sign this or anything. This is just you filling out information. It's a record for you, for your file to submit to us with your other FINTRAC documentation with your paperwork. Okay, so that's politically exposed person, PEP, not POP, PEP, and head of international organization. The reason they are involved in this, right, is these are sensitive people, and they can be influenced because of the positions they hold in society, right? So that's why they're interested in this whole thing. Generally, it's not going to apply to our transactions, right? But they'd like us to take this one extra step when we're dealing with individuals. Okay. And so back up to the PowerPoint presentation. That's that. Suspicious transactions. I wanted to just have one slide on suspicious transactions. What is a suspicious transaction? Usually it might be somebody refusing to provide identification, right? So it's always a warning bell, a red flag if somebody refuses to identify themselves, right? It's for your safety and security too, frankly, right? If somebody won't show you the driver's license, you're not making a copy of it, you're seeing it, it's required by the law. That's what you're saying to them. So that's the first red flag. Secondly, is you're using third parties and it just doesn't seem to make sense to you, so these are third parties who, there's somebody here locally who's involved, but they're dealing with another third party for some reason. You haven't seen a POA, you haven't seen, something. These could be suspicious situations. Sometimes if they're trying to, and we get this quite a bit, I know, where they change the buyer right at the last minute, and it's usually for mortgage financing purposes, right? The bank requires them to add, somebody onto the purchase and sale. That's okay. That's not suspicious. But if there's no reason for it and they're switching, just make sure you understand why it is. That's all it is. And report it if it's suspicious. It's an anonymous process. So you report suspicious transactions to Wanda. She'd look at it, talk to you about it, and make the decision of whether we report this to FINTRAC or not. And if in doubt, contact Wanda. It's always a good statement. Hey, Wanda.
Oh, yes, always.
There you go. And so I'm going to do a slight conclusion, and then we're going to go to the question answers and the chat here. Thanks, guys, for your patience. Power of attorney is the client. The person the power of attorney represents is the third party. When working with entities like a corporation, you need to both identify the person who's going to sign it and the entity itself. So use the two different identification forms, the individual and the entity identification form. Can't use a health card to ID people. Be as specific as you can with occupations. Complete the new form, the POI, I think it's PEP and HIO as an add-on when identifying individuals. So one more piece of paper you got to fill out with individuals. None of the above generally covers all scenarios. And Wanda's our FINTRAC compliance officer and can help you with any situations if your manager can't in any situation. So that's it. Wasn't too long. We're 2:38, a little longer than I said. And I'm just going to pop over now here. So first off, so thank you very much. I'm just going to go into the chats here just to see. And okay, would we need documents to prove the occupation? No, you don't need documents to prove the occupation. There's no requirement for that. Great question. Please do not pass over second validation, especially new health cards. Okay, you can't use health cards to identify anyone, even new health cards. You must use a driver's license or a passport. You can't use health cards. Okay, so hopefully that deals with that one. Non-titled spouse is third party. Okay, so a spouse, I guess, who's not on title. So this is a matrimonial type of interest, I think is what we're talking about here. Yeah, and are they a third party? Yes, they are, and you should identify them. Yeah, they're obviously influential because they're in the agreement purchase sale. Obviously, you're doing the matrimonial interest and getting them to sign off, right, to make sure that they're in agreement with the purchase and sale. But that's a great question. Yeah. Let me just see here now. Dave Briggs. Good. Yeah, good question, Dave. Exactly. Many clients have one or the other, but not both driver's license and passport. You only need one, Mark. So you don't need both. You just need one of a driver's license and passport. You don't need both. So that's a great question. Thank you for that clarification. What would you do if the client's ID has expired? You'd get something that's not expired. So you'd ask them for the passport. So if the driver's license expired, you'd ask them for the passport is what you would do. Okay. Or vice versa, I suppose. And normally they don't expire, the same year. Somebody would be pretty unlucky if they expired at the same time. What other forms of ID can you use besides driver's license or passport? Well, again, there's a residency permit for folks who are non-Canadian citizens. That's probably the most common thing that you would use to identify somebody. You really need something with a picture on. You need something with the legal name, and it can't be a health card, even though the health cards have pictures on it. And it's just because health cards were a lot of fraud at one point in time with health cards, right? So that's why there's a lot of health cards that aren't necessarily valid out there. That's why they don't allow health cards. So those are really it. And sorry,
but there is also the new Ontario ID. So if somebody doesn't have the driver's license, they normally have the Ontario ID, which you can use.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Wanda. Perfect. Good. Keeping right along here. Great questions, guys. Is this an interactive session? Sort of. What ID can be used for refugee status? Yeah, well, it's usually it's a residency certificate is what it is that you get from the federal government. Okay, so they'll have some sort of status, some sort of document to show that they're a resident here. Is 634 done every time or just someone fits the criteria? So let me just go to 634, make sure everybody's on the same page here. 634, every time you do an ID. Yeah, sorry guys, every time you do an ID, do this one now. And I know you haven't been doing it, but that's why we're doing this session. You need to assess whether they are a politically exposed person or a head of an international organization. And again, most of the time, none of the above. You're going to put it on the file, right? Initial put on the file. Hopefully that answers the question. You just keep on going now. Question: using Zoom for buyers to identify them for FINTRAC, is that allowed? They just hold up the driver's license on this screen. I think the answer is yes, you could do it that way. The challenge is it's possible, the chances of fraud is greater, right? Because you're not exactly sure what's going on. I would suggest the easier way of doing it is just to get somebody else to do it for you, the attestation, the agent for you. That's pretty simple. And that could be a real estate agent. So that's the way I'd prefer you do it. But yeah, if they hold it up, they've got the driver's license, it's very clear, the picture matches, you write it down, it's not expired, then yes, that's okay. Excuse me. Hope that answers your question. Lots of great questions. Do we need to fill out form 636 in addition to corporate ID? In addition to corporate ID, an individual and the shareholder said. So yes, you need to fill out 636 in the cases of anyone who has a position of control or position of influence, so beneficial ownership record. So, but again, many corporations only have one person who's the owner, director, and officer of the company. They're both the president and treasurer of the company. So, and they're the director and they're the owner. That's a lot of situations you guys are going to deal with. But yeah, if you've got more than one person who's involved here and more than, and you're not getting both of them to sign, they both don't have to sign for the corporation, then yes, you're going to fill this out for anyone else who's got that influence over it because they've got a 25% or greater ownership interest. That's the simple, or they have a control interest. So there's different classes of shares. Some shares may have control and not ownership and vice versa. So that's why they've got ownership and control as two separate buckets. Either of those greater than 25%, you need to fill this out if it's a person you're not already identifying on a client ID form, which is what you're doing for anyone signing your documentation, whether it's one or two people for a corporation. Hopefully that answers your question, Gordana. Great question. Michael, can PR card be the valid ID? PR card.
Permanent residence.
Oh, permanent residence card. Yeah, yes, absolutely. The permanent residence cards have a picture on, I'm pretty sure, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, they can. Anything with a picture ID that's not the health card and has expiry date on it, and it's got the legal name of the person. Yes, you can use that. So thank you for the translation there. Do we need to check ID? Yes, you need to check ID. You always have to see the source document. You can't rely on your client writing it down or anything. You must see the source document. In case they don't have a passport and their driver's license has expired, serious question. Would we complete the ID and just note that it is expired? I guess, Dave, the answer to the question is yes. I think maybe you've had this situation. It sounds very specific, right? So, so at the end of the day, yeah, you can still do a transaction with somebody who's got an expired driver's license and doesn't have a passport for some reason. I mean, most people have passports. They can't travel without one, right? So it's odd that someone doesn't have a passport, but not completely out of the question. And if it's expired, it could be because of COVID, right? Some people didn't get their stuff up to date because of COVID. And so if it's expired in the last year or two, I'd feel much better than if it's a document that expired 5 years ago, obviously. So the more recent that document, the more certainty you have. But yeah, write it out, make sure you write it out. And in that situation, I think it would make good sense for you just to report it to Wanda. We'll just have it. We'll have it on file. She can take a look too, just to give you a second opinion on it, just to make sure we don't need to do anything further. Okay. But you're starting to get into, why does not someone have a way to identify themselves? Because so many things require you to identify yourselves, right? Travel requires it. Even the vaccination certificates, you're showing ID and stuff to prove that that's your vaccination certificate, right? So many things require it. It's the first question of why would that be? But but it's possible. So thanks for the question, Dave. Hopefully that helps you out there. Do we need to check IDs in person, or is picture fine? No, picture. You can't do a picture. So you can do the one of two things, right? You can physically be there, see it. You can technically do it on a Zoom session. We had that question, right? If you really see it, you're comfortable, you can see the picture, you can match the picture, you can check the expire, you can check the legal name. You can do that. But also, if you're ever in doubt, you can just get an agent to do it for you who could physically see the actual driver's license or passport and do the identification for you. Since COVID started, we have less person meetings. I just get my clients to text or email a picture of the driver's license. So don't do that, Dave. Get them. That's not good enough. You need to see the original. So they can't just take a picture and everything. So the Zoom session would be a better way, Dave. Do it that way. Do the Zoom session way. Yeah, I think that's that. So let me just see on the chat here. Bruce, oh, hello, Mr. Tilden. Aria recently sent out a piece of FINTRAC suggesting that a bank drafts, well, better than cash, isn't as good as a certified check because it's more difficult. Yeah, our position is so bank drafts and certified checks for us are one and the same. Bank drafts are less expensive usually, and they're easier to do than certified checks. So you could do either, Bruce. I wouldn't worry about that. They're both good. They're both good for the money. They're both real cash, right? A bank draft, right, is the bank saying they've got the money, they're authorizing it, and a certified check is obviously the bank saying we've already taken the money out. The money's out and it's already applied to this, so their funds are there. So both are good things. Bruce again. Okay, for corporations, do we complete the FINTRAC individual report for every owner with 25% or more? No. So all you need to do is do the FINTRAC idea form for the person signing, the authorized signing officer. You need to do the entity identification, and then you need to do the beneficial ownership record form 636 for anyone with the 25% or more, but you don't have to do another individual ID for them. Bruce, great question. Hello, Sam Heim. Do we have do we have to identify a foreigner who is using a POA if the forms are given to us as complete? How do we know who they are? Do we have to have a foreigner who is signing a POI? Okay, well, you know what I would say, Sam, is a POI should be done by a lawyer, right? And so that's the first step. And you can Google any lawyer, right? That would be the first thing I'd always do if I got a POI and this is really somebody who's foreign and there's somebody local who's got this POI showing it to me saying I can sell this person's house, right? I would first off check, look at the document, who prepared it, who's the law firm, are they a Canadian law firm or not, and search them. If they're a non-Canadian law firm, search them. And do some due diligence around it. You can only go so far with this sort of stuff, but just use your common sense on these situations, right? And again, a power of attorney, I've seen a whole bunch of different ones over the years, fraudulent ones, right? That are generally there's no lawyer involved in the fraudulent ones, or you search it and it's a fake law firm. There's no such thing. Or even on Google, you'll find it says, beware, this law firm doesn't exist or something. It's amazing what's online these days. So definitely do a Google search of the parties, the names of the person who's being represented by the power of attorney and the law firm who's prepared it. And that will help to give some sort of, common sense check on whether it's a legit POA or not. Hopefully that helps you, Sam. Bruce, okay, wouldn't the completion of the individual corporate PEP forms by the parties themselves with the certification that they are correct in the signature be more powerfully documented saying and leave us out of the whole thing? Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah, yeah. Great one, Bruce, but unfortunately the government would like us to do that. So we have to do that. We have to fill out that form, and we have to do our best to figure out if they're head of an international organization or a politically exposed person. And accountability part of what was last. Okay, accountability a key being part of the last comment. Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. Yep. Accountability for sure. I think that's it in terms of questions. Anything else, guys, before we, sorry, Wanda, did you?
Nope, that was it. No,
that was it. Okay, I think we got it all here. Good. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. And sorry, it's a bit of a dry subject, but it's important. And again, if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to contact Wanda, talk to your manager, and hopefully we've covered, some of the basics of FINTRAC, some of the areas where we get the most common questions, and finally the new things this year, which is the beneficial ownership record for corporations, for entities, and the politically exposed persons and heads of international organizations, which is now another form we fill out with the individual ID. Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you guys. Happy New Year.
Thanks,
Looking
guys.
forward to a great 2022 with you. Thank you very much, Wanda. Nice to be with you as always. And I will stop the recording and goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.